So I said, all right, back to the flights I hate. So I'll go over to the Skype.
It's gonna be great. Perfect. Thank you again, by the way, so much for
Yeah, it is. It's now decades. Although,
one of the questions will be for you.
I'll get your question back.
Or you're not. It's kind of going like that.
I can't sleep much longer than that.
All right, we have 6 microphones and 4 of us.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have all 4 coverage.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to do that all the time. No, that's not a
Practice safe microphone.
My laptop decided to just take an update.
Seriously.
I love it.
Microsoft.
Do you,
I'm not Microsoft, so yeah.
Microsoft. You used to be.
Okay.
Used to be Microsoft.
Do you have anything on the cloud that we can pull down for you?
I mean, it was just that title slide, so that's we don't have anything projected. So if people remember the names of our keynote speakers, then you don't need the slides that were going to be projected behind me.
Oh, did it literally reboot as you were projecting it?
It literally just decided to restart. And now it's a black screen. Restart.
With an important security update, no doubt.
I'm sure it's a security update. Should we get going? It is 5 past 1.
Yeah, I think on my little photo extravaganza threw things off. People are still eating, but I know Eric's got to get out of here, so and catch a plane. So
I'm good for an hour.
let's get rolling.
Yeah. Okay. And we're good with the live stream? We're live. Excellent. All right, so we have no visuals. That's what you expect from an audio conference. I love it. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, so in past AVARs, we've done a keynote, and then a lot of times we've had a panel immediately after the keynote featuring the keynote speaker and related topics. We had too many amazing submissions this time for our workshop, so again, huge thanks to everyone who contributed to the workshops. But we still didn't want to lose that particular part of the format, so we thought, wouldn't it be great to get all 3 of our keynotes over the past 3 days up here and have a conversation? And you're probably asking, Scott, how can we have a conversation that spans between hearing health and auditory illusions and building the sphere? Great question. We're going to try, and we'll see where we can find connections. But this is meant to be an organic conversation. I've got a couple of pre-queued questions that I'll start us off with. But if there are specific questions that you have for our panelists as a whole, or for hopefully at least 2 of our panelists at a time, please pop over to a microphone, and we'd love to make this an interactive conversation. So many interesting topics over the last 3 days. I guess I wanted to start, and each of you can reintroduce yourselves to the audience. And the loaded question that I wanted to start with first was, what is the augmented or virtual reality experience that you've had that really was your seminal moment that changed your life, that made you think, hey, there's actually something here? Or you can be a skeptic and say, I'm still waiting on that one. So, Annika, do you want to go first with that question?
I can go first, yes. I'm Annika Neidhardt, right? And I work on plausibility of spatial auditory illusions in augmented reality. And my augmented reality experience that really kind of flashed me, I don't know, was when I really couldn't distinguish it anymore, when I couldn't say it was real or virtual. So that was super interesting, because for a long time it didn't work. For a long time there was always something you could say, but we are there.
That's great. Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Schmidt. I've been mostly in game audio for the last 3 or 4 decades now. As far as VR, AR experience, probably it was, I did some consulting for a company called Magic Leap, which had a very, very good prototype that I think actually some people in this room worked on. And it was, you know, refrigerator-sized box with this giant helmet that you put on for augmented reality. And I thought that was amazing. Although I have to admit, a really close runner-up is just having gone to your talk this morning and being in awe of the engineering. It's like building the Hubble telescope that you all did. So that would be number 2.
All right, well, thank you.
Here.
I'm Erik Hockman. Wow, so interestingly, I don't think I've actually had an AR VR experience yet that has been revolutionary for me. But with that said, I mean, because I'm all about like communal experiences and group versus the experience for the one. We did a roller coaster at Universal in Japan, which was basically kind of a Space Mountain sort of a roller coaster. You're riding through the dark. And at one point we did a VR overlay on that roller coaster where we had the goggles synced to the ride and the sound, and that was pretty spectacular. So if there was anything transported, that's it.
That's awesome. And to be clear, I mean, we could have a whole separate philosophical conversation, but I believe there is a place and a role for audio exclusive augmented and virtual reality experiences. So I didn't mean to say what's the experience that had a visual component that was the most transformative. So you know, being able to just auditorily not be able to tell if a sound is real or virtual, I think is pretty powerful, whether or not there's something visually correlated to it. So. The next topic that I wanted to cover, like Erik, you spent a ton of time on this morning, the challenges of tooling. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I think one of the things I want to ask you first is, what is the one tool in your tool sets that you use today that you find the most useful, the thing that you go back to the most? And then we'll have a follow-up later of what is missing from your tool set right now. But let's start first with any of you who wants to go first. Erik, you again talked about how you get to, or you have the opportunity to build all of your own tools from scratch, and you have to because they just don't exist.
That's right.
But is there one exemplar that comes to mind of, before this my life was hell and now it's much better, or?
We're really focusing on the oralization tools right now, just because the sphere is just so complex in the time domain. So getting the right tools to make Sphere seem friendly to the content creators, that's really the most important tool. Because you know, just wiggling sound around, that's not so hard.
Right.
But wiggling sound around and having it oralized exactly correctly, that's the skill.
Great. So for you, it's the tool that connects the creator with the technology
Yes.
in the most expressive way.
Correct.
Great. Brian.
Yeah, and I was thrilled to hear you talk about that, because it made me realize that one of the great things about conferences like this is you find people in semi-unrelated fields but are solving the same problem. Game audio, that has been our problem for 4 decades, right? When I started in game audio, every game had its own custom written software, whether it's for graphics or for audio. We had a custom audio engine if I wanted it to do, you know, have a sound effect that was in the same key as the underlying music. But I got to write some code to make that happen. And over the, you know, again, about 4 decades, I guess game audio has sort of been a real thing. There have started to be some tools, Wise, Fmod, Unreal, Metasounds, you know, and so on, that solve a lot of the very common paradigms, right? The goal of these game audio tools is, how do we eliminate the friction of needing to understand the technology of the system so we can focus on the art and the expressivity and the emotional impacts. But there's still a lot of under the hood work you have to do. And one of the common refrains that we have is this ongoing battle we have between, hey, these tools make it really easy to do, you know, music that crossfades at the right time, and has interactive layers, and has timed stingers, and sends the information back and meters itself, and multi-band EQs itself out when other things happen. But now it becomes this paradigm that if you want to use the tools, you're now kind of stuck inside this box of things that tools lets you do. Mm-hmm. So, for us, it's an unsolved problem yet. It's how do we simultaneously have fairly frictionless tools that let the creative people be creative, but not put them in the box of, oh, the tool does this, therefore I'll do that.
Yeah, so empower me without hemming me in with guardrails that
yeah, if the guardrails are if it becomes too easy, it becomes too easy to just do what the thing does.
Yeah.
And so you don't experiment so much out the box.
Yeah, great. Annika, what's your favorite tool?
Well, so I belong to the early people that worked on position dynamic binaural synthesis, and when I started to work on that, there was no tool available for PhD students somewhere, like free, open source software. We tried several things, but nothing could be used for that. So really, and so I initiated our own tool, PyPinSim, Python renderer for position dynamic binaural synthesis, and I used that throughout all my research, and I'm still using it. And now more and more universities have used it as well, and it has evolved. So many colleagues contributed and made it really a nice tool, and many students also use it because Python is also very accessible for students, right? And I think that's my favorite tool.
That's wonderful. So an interesting commonality between all of us here is saw a gap, wrote the tool, and now so that everybody picked that as their favorite tool. I was expecting Brian to say Excel, but
yeah, that's probably the most useful game audio tool is Excel. Yeah, that's yeah.
Now let's turn it the other direction. And what's missing from your tool chest today? What are the things that you're either excited to work on directly next, or wishing that somebody in this esteemed community of AES, AVAR would solve for us?
You want me to start?
Any of the three of you, yeah?
Sure. So my current interest levels are on source separation and manipulation. I would say that's just in the infancy of how I'd like to use it. And also content migration is also a big aspect of the dev work that I'm doing right now. So if we build content for venue A, it has to move into all of the other venues with minimal to zero human interaction. And I guess the last thing that I would say on that is also coming up with a tool set that helps prevent user error. There's a lot of people of various skill levels that are going to be creating content for us, and my goal is to even that playing field. I want a high schooler in their bedroom to basically create a show that sounds just as good as somebody who's been doing it for 30 years professionally. So I'm looking at the tool sets to enable that.
What does user error look like in the sphere?
Oh.
Give us your top 3 examples.
No.
So for the work or the challenges I'm working on, I think one of the main things that are missing are really data sets of measured room impulse responses, but also of perceptual data. So creating them all, myself or ourselves, is quite tedious, and it would be nice, like, if there were more.
Yeah, there's a lot of different categories of things. Going back to I guess my keynote, one thing that I would like to start seeing is some notion of tools that monitor, right, what SPLs are we likely to put into people's ears. Mm-hmm. Because again, it is a pervasive, it's a real danger. It's a ongoing thing, and 20 years from now, we're going to have lots of deaf people because of everybody wearing headphones. So to the extent that tools at some point in the future maybe will have it, make it better known, characteristics of the headphones people are wearing and how we can make content that delivers the same emotional impact, but maybe not quite as frankly dangerously to people's hearing. On the pure content creation side, there's very similar. How do we make the cool things that our systems can do easier to get the cool things out of them? And still, again, leaving the flexibility there. So I think that's a big thing, making it, there's all sorts of, a lot of game audio is very automation stuff. So, when you have a game that has 120,000 lines of dialogue, which is 4 orders of magnitude more than a motion picture, 3 orders of magnitude, which is still a lot. How do you just keep track of that and have it not be an error-prone mess, especially when you now have to take that and translate it into 12 languages and do it in a way that picks up all the busy, dirty work that Excel is really good at. I suppose Excel excels at.
Or an AI system, yes.
Or an AI system, yeah, seriously. An AI assistant for game audio people that managed all of that checked your file names and just made you more productive on the stuff that wasn't the bread and butter stuff that just has to be dealt with. We need that way more than we need, AI generated music or something. Although that would be cool too.
Would also be nice for researchers. So I think for everybody, so handling all the shitty work.
That's a very unsexy tool, I know, but it'd be really useful.
But it's high, it's high utility. Erik, I want to come back to your observation about minimizing user error, because I feel like there's definitely a place for making sure people don't do things the wrong way or from a naive perspective. But I think from my perspective, having enough parameterized control so that people can do crazy things that your system was never designed for or anticipated and create something delightful and new, I think is kind of the counter argument that I would make to like some kinds of user error. If it's more experimentation, I think is definitely something that that we welcome. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, or have you had somebody who's come into one of your installations and said they want to do something and you're like, well, that's not possible? Or is it always just yes and let's figure out how to do it?
The answer is always yes, so let's figure it out.
Yes.
It's not acceptable to say anything else.
Yeah.
The first example that I could say is I could go out and I could spend $1 million on a Bentley and I could let a 6-year-old drive it and they're still going to smash it into a wall. And that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? I want my Bentley and I want to drive it. So, and this is a very real problem. We want to, you can have the best sound system, the best tools, but ultimately if the person who's pushing the faders is having a bad day, then everybody's having a bad day. The sound system doesn't sound well or doesn't perform.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out ways to minimize or eventually hopefully eliminate the concept of bad days through AI, through other forms of algorithmic assistance, to just making the system more polite to operate. One of the things that I'm changing subjects now. One of the things that you were talking about just a few minutes ago was about trying to figure out how to limit volume in headphones to protect hearing and such. I mean, volume is an interesting thing. Loud sound is physically pleasurable. It actually releases endorphins, and it really directly hits your pleasure centers. And if you take away that loud sound, and if you're doing a live concert, people are going to walk out of there feeling like they were ripped off. You know, they didn't get the experience that they wanted. And way back when we first started out building Sphere, the original concept of the infrasound addition to Sphere was a way of giving the audience that huge physical sensation of low frequencies and impact without destroying the quality of the sound, and also from an ingress-egress standpoint, make it so we could have very, very powerful low frequency shows without annoying the neighbors. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think like an interesting field of research might be a way of, you know, find an alternate way of injecting endorphins into the audio stream, so to speak.
Hopefully a non-pharmacological one, but
Yes, exactly. But I mean, but that's like one of the tickets. I mean, and
Yeah.
again, we were trying to address it with infrasound, but I think there's a lot of other unique ways that we can look on, you know, medical ways, you know, however, to introduce that to increase the overall experience, and if that could make its way into the consumer world, so I can still put on my headphones, but feel like I'm
feel like you're at a real
right.
concert. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
kind of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
How do you simulate? If what we're trying to simulate is, I'm at the Sphere, but I'm in my house. I don't want to just look like I'm at the Sphere. I want it to feel like I'm at the Sphere.
Yeah.
There's a club I play not too far from here, and the stage is even with the subwoofer, so you can stand on it. And that's my favorite place to stand on that stage playing bass, is on the subwoofer. For that whatever reason, you want to just. So yeah, that kind of research would be awesome if there are signal processing people or physiology people who want to help us figure out how to get the pleasurable experience that, because of the endorphins that are released from the sacculus, when you hit 90 dB and more of low frequency energy, help us do that without brute force throwing SPL at the people's eardrums, and that would be a really big help. Call to action.
There you go.
Well, that really nicely ties to the next topic I was going to have us cover, which was experience consistency and experience accessibility. So how do you, I mean, Eric, you did an amazing job of talking about this in your talk, that an audience of 10,000 plus people each gets a targeted and curated experience. But how do you approach in the experiences you build making it so that everyone gets the best possible experience while still at the safest listening level, while still dealing with variations in how people hear and perceive? So what is that sweet spot? We had some people talking yesterday about, you know, sort of the hopeful future of, you know, perfectly personalized HRTFs as one axis of that. But in the here and now, how do you think about building experiences that everyone can enjoy, participate in, get the same sensation of real virtual illusions? So I think each of you will probably answer this in a slightly different way, but I'd love to get your takes on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's this vision out there for these personalized audio, right? So that you can really get control over your own environment, or what you kind of let through to your senses or not. And I think that would be very helpful, because it would also help reducing the level in some cases to the personal own preferences maybe, and also I think we often have so complex and loud environments, just like walking to work or driving to work. There's sometimes, if just a lorry is passing by, or I don't know, there's sometimes so loud sounds, or in the restaurant when they use the plates, and it can be super loud sometimes. And I like having a bit more control over that would be really great. I would love to use it, but I would also love to, develop it, of course.
So being able to have some personalized way to
Yeah.
manipulate sort of real world hear through as kind of one
exactly.
potential way to think about it. Okay, great. Brian or Eric?
Yeah, and I think, you know, in games we kind of have bits of this where, you know, personalization of experiences is a big thing in interactive entertainment, whether it's VR or video games, or, you know, you know, if somebody's hard, and from an accessibility standpoint, you also want this kind of personalization, so that if I'm a little hard of hearing. I can bring everything except the dialogue down a little bit, and so I'm not having to ride the volume control to hear the really soft television dialogue lately.
Said no one in the last couple of years, yes.
Yes. So yeah, I had personalized experiences, which is easy for us for games because generally the rendering of the audio is a one-to-one, device to user. That's obviously a very much easier challenge than trying to have a personalized experience for 22,000 individuals. Although even just the fact that this section can be Japanese and this section can be English is just pretty cool.
That was amazing, yeah.
So yeah, in general, I think just increasing personalization capabilities and starting to share those, I think, across devices and, so your media delivery environment starts to learn who you are and it picks up on the things that you would probably want to do. And then maybe it carries it into the sphere at some point where it knows what my personal preference in seat 29B is going to be, and whatever magic you do to make that happen happens. That would be pretty cool.
That's great. In my world, things that people have to put on are typically frowned upon. So we shy away from headphones, and if we do something with headphones, is it a BYOD scenario, or is the building making the investment in passing stuff out, or are they selling it as, a merchandising piece that you can use for the venue, and then you have a souvenir. So, a lot of the work that I'm looking into is the introduction of transaural audio into the seats, where we can expand on the spatialization system. So far, for example, Sphere is 2D video, but when we look at like the needs of 3D video, it changes. For example, 3D video, if I'm punching the camera, or effectively you, right in the nose, I'm punching every single one of you directly in the nose. That's the way everybody's resolving that particular motion. So if you just had a spatial sound system that's spewing sound into the space, unless you were that one lucky person that was perfectly on axis, that sound isn't correlated to the visual action. So what we try to do is we try to make that sound be up close and personal to every single person inside the venue for that kind of an application. And then again, I'm all about the and. So that's like audio for a 3D video, but then audio for a 2D video suddenly becomes more of a 3D space. It's interesting how those two compete or complement each other. So
That's great. Yeah, so related to that, I'd love to ask all of you about audio accessibility and any of the work that you're doing that you believe uniquely supports the blind and visually impaired community, or how do you approach the deaf and hard of hearing community in the experiences that you build? Has there been a Sphere audio-only experience yet, or one that you wish you could build, or have you heard from audience members? Love to get more from each of you on that.
I personally fantasize about a show where the screen is off. The audience comes in and you just sit in black, and we do a audio only experience. Because I think between that and the way the infrasound system works in the venue, we could create some pretty memorable moments without that visual input. As far as ADA is concerned, we've been exploring a lot of different ways to use our infrasound system and some offerings from other different vendors to give people that are deaf or hearing limited the same experience as the rest of the audience. So that is, we spend an awful lot of time trying to create inclusive designs and to push that limit as to what we can do.
That's wonderful. Brian?
Oh.
I mean, your entire talk was about hearing health.
Yeah, so many things here. Again, it's kind of interesting, again, seeing the parallels. I hadn't realized there was so much parallel here, but in video games, there is a category of video game. We call them audio-only video games, which of course is a really strange term to call them. But there's a pretty active community of blind video gamers, blind gamers that either have special games for them, or in the case of some games, I don't know if any of you are familiar with like the game Mortal Kombat. That was one of the earliest games where, so Mortal Kombat is a fighting game, you know, like an arcade-style fighting game, you know, trying to do, and you're
Great pantomime, Brian.
do not tell Ed Boon that was how I described Mortal Kombat. The sound design team there is very, very particular. They do a really good job of trying to get lots of detail in. And they had some feedback from the blind gaming community that kind of unbeknownst to them, Mortal Kombat became a game that was very prevalent in the blind gaming community. And there were a couple of minor things that they're like, wow, we can't really tell what's happening. So they actually contacted NetherRealm Studios, the makers of Mortal Kombat. And Mortal Kombat made a couple of minor tweaks to their game, adding some sounds that didn't have sound, and I believe in one case, having a sound connected to a physical parameter of the game, what we would in games call an RTPC, that didn't have it before, and then it did. And with that change, what happened was, so Mortal Kombat is also a game that is often used in tournaments, like you can enter a Mortal Kombat tournament. And there are now people who are completely blind, gamers, that can compete at tournament level with sighted players on the same system. So that's how much adding some extra sound detail can be. And so, and this was, 8 or 10 years ago. And since then, a lot of the high-end games kind of pride themselves on, can somebody is blind play through the game without seeing. And in some cases, that requires some minor accessibility tweaks. And kind of ironically, if you're going to make a game that is for the visually impaired, you'll tend to have a little bit more work for the sound team to do. Right, in the case of Mortal Kombat, right, they had to add some sounds that were not represented. If you're trying to improve playability for deaf people, now you're going to have things on screen. For people with hearing impairments. Now you're going to put more visuals on the screen. So it's almost, you have to get the cross-sensory collaboration going there. It's like, yeah, let's put some visual cues in for something that a hearing person would have heard, or let's add some oral cues in for something that a blind person can't see. So it's the top-end games do spend quite a bit of time on that. And Sony Studios in particular are really, really good at that now.
Yeah. Annika?
So for me, especially blind people or visually impaired people are super interesting because they are really listening experts, just because they have to rely on hearing so much more than we do. With all the research I did in the field of perception of room acoustics, you really notice that many people don't pay much attention to what they actually hear in everyday lives, and the visually impaired people do. So they are very interesting participants, or very interesting people to study their capabilities of how accurately they can hear some things. And that's quite an interesting measure of how accurate a rendering should be, because it should be interesting for them as well, right? That should be taken into account, and they really, it's so impressive what they can. I mean, just when they use their mobile phones, right, and you just hear these super quick speech, with just the beginning of the word, and they know, and I can't follow it all. But they, in the same way, they are able to understand their acoustic environment and tell much about it where we wouldn't be able to, and so it's very really fascinating on the one hand to learn about that, and also to really make sure that they are test candidates for good rendering systems.
Is that a group of people you deliberately have tried to get into?
Yes. So we really organized in Immenau an event for blind people to try out some of these things, and also to give some talks. So them giving some talks about how they live their lives and how it is for them. So that's super interesting, and so I'm trying, but it's not always easy to.
Because I remember
get in
you were saying that one of your aha experiences when you, for the first time, personally experienced audio that you thought was realistic, identical to realism.
Yes.
I was wondering if that bar would be in the same place for somebody who had been blind their whole life.
Yeah, that would
That'd
be
be very
interesting.
cool.
I have a question, but I'm not quite sure how to ask it. If you had reality, just the world as it is, would you want to use reality as the starting point for that, or would you want to do some kind of a minimalized version of reality to create that soundstage?
I'm not sure if I'm referring to the same thing here, but so with, for example, hyperreality, you can also create very good tools to learn, for example, understanding the environment, right? So there was an interesting study where the directivity of a sound source was it was made more directional than it actually was, and with that, for example, localizing reflectors or walls was easier. And knowing that, you can use that to create tools for people to learn echolocation, for example, and that's interesting. But I think you were referring to a bit.
Like, do you do deconstructive mixing? Like, get to the point where you get to only the important stuff, and because do you have too much clutter, too much information when you're trying to give people, or is it better if you become more sparse?
In my case, it's really the scenes that we are using in the experiments are very simple. There's usually just one sound source, maybe two. That's already much. So it's pretty organized and not complex or overloaded. So we don't have this question at the moment, but it's important to address that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it is interestingly enough a very hot topic in interactive audio and game audio right now, because in a video game, right, a dumb engine, if you have sound sources of everything that's making sound, and you make them all make sound, you get a cacophonic, a noisy mess, cacophonic mess. And so one of the things we're trying, we do is, where do we, forget about signal processing, where do we just decide aesthetically that these sounds of these enemies over here are not important because they're not dangerous to me, but Lawrence is very dangerous to me farther away. So
Always.
he's the important sound, we bring him up, we don't even render these, and that's kind of one of the, again, interactive mixing is kind of the hot topic. How do you get rid of the sound so things aren't too cluttered? Because the game engine is pretty dumb, right? It's objects in 3D space, and there's sound emitters on them with directionality, and that's all fine and good, but no one would mix a movie like that.
Yeah, I mean that again. That gets to one of the topics that we've heard over the last 3 days is sort of the spectrum between realism and plausibility and emotional authenticity, or being able to tell a story, and where should our work fall? I mean, it's every time I've had a project, if I wasn't the one making the decision, the person making the decision said yes, all of those. But like, are those the axes that you use in the experience that you build? Is that the right way to be thinking about, where our sounds are constructed? What's your overall philosophy in building a system? Are you going for hyper realism or surrealism, or are you going for make people feel a certain way? I think each of you may have a different answer for this one. Annika, do you want to start?
Maybe I'm not sure how much I have to contribute there. It's more that I'm also a bit of a musician as a hobby, and I think when you do composition, or when you compose music, I think it's super interesting. You can achieve a lot of emotional impact, I think, with the dynamics, right? So the changes between something suddenly really loud and something pretty quiet, and I think that's also used in movie sounds to create these kind of effects, and they are of course also interesting then for VR, AR games. But I think also the closeness of sounds can be super interesting to create emotions. Like this whispering in the ear is always very efficient to create a strange feeling of intimacy maybe.
So let me share a sound design mixing trick that I've done several times and continue to do. For example, in a theater, before the doors even open, so the audience hasn't even come in yet, I'll introduce a sound that could be just a low frequency rumble or a white noise source that you instantly forget. I mean, it's just like walking into this room and the air handling systems and such. So you don't, and it's on before you even walked into the venue. It's on throughout the entire pre-show and the entire first scene of the show that you're watching. At a particular moment in the show, I turn it off. And that change in reality, that change in perception is, it can take people up to 45 seconds or so to realign their reality with that new space. You know, so playing with, I had one of the slides in my deck was all about the creative contrasts, and that's one of them where you really want to, you can play with people's perceptions. And the other thing that I'll say on that too is that we're learning. I mean, Sphere is an infinitely complex thing, and so everything that we're doing in there is new, and it's the first time we're trying it. But one of the things that we've learned so far about spatial audio inside that space is less is more. If you can whittle your mix down to just a few sources from just a few locations, the enormity of the space becomes massive, and the sense of envelopment is huge. But if you just start throwing reverb channels and throwing wallas and other stuff up there, you're basically collapsing the entire environment. So it works exactly opposite from what people think they're going to try to achieve. So less is more.
That's great.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that philosophy that I was saying before about sort of calling out sounds. In games, obviously we want to be engaging, and it's sort of at the end of the day, I would say emotional issues trump realism pretty much every time. Right, your job sort of as a composer is to sort of be the Marty O'Donnell, the Halo composer likes to say, he's the emotional puppeteer of the player, that he can tweak the feelings, right, the brain chemistry that gets elicited from playing these games kind of on a whim, right? Add this little thing in here and have it sneak in there, and now you're feeling tense and now you're feeling heroic. But it is a super useful tool to have this sort of base realism that you can kind of either bring in from time to time or at least have as some sort of stated reference or something like that. So I think both are necessary. You want to, having it as, again, in your toolkit, the ability to have that thing that just is so real that you can't tell that it's not there orally, and then use that either as a starting point or use that, occasionally as something that, you want that ASMR thing in your ear. So I'm going to use the personalized HRTF to bring that whisper right up next to you.
Yeah. But it's a curated realism. I think that was the great thing
curated realism
about Erik's example of introducing a tone into the space is you're in control of what that is.
Yeah, I'm immediately thinking, how can we do that in games now?
We're into about the last 15 minutes or so. So if anyone from the audience has questions and wants to come up to the microphone and ask our esteemed panel of keynote speakers, love to get your questions answered. So yes. First question.
Hi. Yeah, ever since the keynote today, I had a burning question now that Erik and Brian are on the same panel here. In the Sphere, you have a lot more control than a standard music venue. And in that way, you are really aware of probably how much dB and signal you're sending to people's ears and the hearing damage you could do there. What kind of considerations do you have there, because you're kind of balancing, as you mentioned, things about endorphins versus very measurable amounts of hearing damage to the audience? So I was just curious about the dialogue between you two about that.
Interesting. So I'll wear the official legal hat on that one, which is we are completely in compliance with OSHA hearing regulations and LEQ minimums there. But one of the things that we've gotten from Sphere, which is kind of interesting so far, is if you read just random blogs or messages that people post reviewing shows that they've seen at Sphere, a common thread amongst everyone is they didn't need to put in hearing protection. And people are blown away with the fact that, I never go to a show without my earplugs, but at Sphere I didn't need to put them in. And when they leave the venue, they don't have any tinnitus, it's just, and quite frankly, we weren't setting out to do that per se, but just the way that we're presenting the sound and having so many sources and mixing in the air versus mixing in the wire, so to speak, where it's not just like you're not taking like a complex band, folding it down into a single channel and then spraying the audience with it. It's out everywhere. So you're getting the perceived SPL without the real SPL associated with that. And again, that wasn't, no one actually set out to design that. It's just kind of a happy accident that kind of came from that. But we do have very strict regulations that we follow. So we watch the SPL. We've got traffic lights for the people that are controlling the system, and they, and if they breach it for too long, the system will take over at that point. Kind of a funny side note. I'm going to just ramble for 1 second here. The sound system at Sphere is also could be considered a weapon. If we were to take every single driver that we had in that building and steer it to a single seat, in all likelihood, we could do some serious damage. So with that in mind, we're keenly aware of that, and we put safeguards in the system to prevent those sort of scenarios. So it's like the system won't allow somebody who's designing the system or coming up with a new beam configuration to even go there.
So that's your 6-year-old in the Bentley protection there.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, I've been doing the pro bono stuff for the WHO for about a year now, and one thing that they definitely have tried to make very clear to the people who are in the group is the group consists not only of audiologists and doctors, but also musicians and concert hall people, and is that the goal of the whole Make Listening Safe initiative is not to make it such that humans never hear sound over 85 decibels. Their goal is not to take the fun away of going to the Sphere or going to the Lime, which is the local club I was talking about, and for 3 hours enjoy some music that if you were in there for 10 hours would be exceptionally unhealthful. But for 3 hours, it probably is okay. And at the very least, have you as the public be aware of your hearing. I like your clients, I never go to a club without my earplugs. I never go to a sporting event without my earplugs. But yeah, I've been known to pull them out once in a while for a period of time. And so it's, again, it's not like they're trying to prevent people's sacculus from detecting activating the vestibular system and getting those endorphins into your brain. It's just to make sure that people are aware of both the content side, the device side, and the consumer side. Hey, this is something you might want to watch out for. And if you're going to go party at night, go have a good time, just, take breaks every once in a while. and be kind of, make your listening safe.
So you just said a magic word. I was actually going to make a comment about this because it's completely off subject of what we've been talking about, but I can't imagine a better audience to ask this question to. So one of my little pet projects that I'm super interested in doing, and if anybody wants to help me, call me, galvanic vestibular stimulation. If there is a way that I can start incorporating that into the live experience and do simulated motion base without moving the audience, I'm way interested.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. If we can stimulate that part so that you get the feeling of the loudness without necessarily although there's something about feeling.
Well, but I mean, I want to have a joystick, and I want everybody to fall to the left or fall to the right.
Stand up, sit down,
and program that into the show.
Yeah. Okay, that's scary.
That would be
That
fun
would
with
be
video
really
games
fun.
too.
And
Right?
yeah,
I mean, it's like basically
Yeah, you get
having
punched and you actually.
a whole motion
Yeah.
simulator
Yeah.
without actually physically moving.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Commented an observation. Earlier today, I mentioned, Eric, the show that I was at, that I had brought my hearing protection, didn't put it in. One of my observations of that is it's a big volume, and it's something that we like in music education rooms that I do a lot of, is volume helps us. And when you've got a lot of volume at the same time that you've got a lot of loudspeakers, then you're able to have air around things, and that kind of helps. Along with it, as Eric has pointed out, the evenness of SPL coverage throughout all of the seats then also contributes to that, and that's not a normal sound system. It's louder here at the front of this room than it is at the back of this room, and that's just because of the technology that we're using here versus the technology that's being used. So the observation and what struck me is if we take the stuff that Eric's got, the infrasound actuators, and we think about perhaps bone conduction from our headphones, and we combine those things together, so we kind of take experiences that we're learning in the live arena, in the real world, and now maybe some of those things, along with your comment sort of drove my point home of how do we get people to fall over left and right. So combination of all sorts of other things besides audio and besides picture in order to create experiences in the body that lean you left, right, get you excited, excite all of the things that we want to do. And so I think this panel is great because we're driving across all of 3 different points of view that maybe if we combine those things, that will be the next generation VR, AR.
Absolutely. Love it. Any follow-up comments on that?
Agreed.
Yeah. Like I said, I love it when, I bump into people who I don't bump into in game audio, but we find out there's similarity of the kinds of problems that we're trying to solve, whether it's, realism in, sounding modalities or delivery of audio in amazing ways. So that's why I guess AVAR exists, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why the AES exists.
Both. Yes.
I paid them.
Yeah.
A paid endorsement.
Yeah, so one of the cool things about being here at AVAR, obviously, is we get to be in a room of a ton of audio nerds and talk about very interesting specific audio things. But with all of these aspects of audio development, right, we are making these things for a kind of layman consumer who probably has never heard of what an HRTF is in their entire life, right? So on the Spiro presentation as well, I know you talked about using a bunch of extras and people for double-blind testing. I was wondering about, for each of you, how have insights from consumers or people testing the products maybe shown a light on something that you might have never thought about as someone that knows more about it but isn't experiencing it from a totally new perspective?
Good question. Let me see how I can answer that. Nobody goes home singing an HRTF. But so like when you're talking to people that aren't one of us, right? If just the average person off the street, they don't ever point out what's right because it's just right. But we really listen to what's wrong. Because if they're noticing something that was intended or not intended, especially if it was not intended, then well, that's something that we want to key in and fix. And for the testing that we were doing, I mean, that's really what we were looking for. We wanted a real big cross section of age ranges and gender ranges to see just how accurate we could be in budget limiting the most scientific way that we could possibly achieve that. So I guess the thesis on that statement is just listen to what's wrong.
Yeah, and I think that one of the benefits that we have as, again, from the video game entertainment side is that we do have the ability to get feedback immediately, directly from the people who are using our products. For example, I mentioned the other day the importance of maybe trying to gather some audio telemetry data, right? How are our users listening? Right? From a hearing safety perspective, it's nice so we can figure out what they're doing with volume. But from a mixing perspective, right, if we notice that our players are always, they're statistically always bringing down the music slider, then it should make us think a little bit, hey, maybe we're mixing our music a little bit too loud overall in our games because I see 70% of the players out there manually go in and do that themselves. Or maybe whenever they get to this one scene, they're bringing the volume down. Okay, maybe that means now I have to go back to how I author my content and pay a little bit more attention to, my overall dynamic range and how things are doing. So I think the importance of feedback is critical, and in games we can kind of, like I said, it's like we're watching over their shoulder, the kind of telemetry data that we can get from our players in real time.
So I think for the audio for augmented reality, there's still quite a lack of authoring tools at all. And I think that's the first step. So as soon as you have authoring tools and you can spread them in the community, super interesting contents will be created, because it's, I think, one thing that always gives you a different perspective is talking to another person that has a different perspective, right? And giving them the opportunity or the possibility to create their content. And I think there it's also especially interesting to really consider the needs of, for example, blind people, that they can also create their audio contents because they have a very different perspective on what we hear. And it can be super interesting for us if we let them, sort of. I think that's what should be done. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for the great question. So we're in the final 2 minutes or so. I wanted to get some closing thoughts from each of you. And one of the last questions that we'd talked about discussing is getting to done. How do you know when the projects you're working on are done? I know Brian and I working on games, the audio is never done. The game is just released. And I'm sure that the same is true for for live performance and experiences. But how do you assess progress? How do you know that you're going in the right direction? What are the goalposts that you've set for yourself that you're looking forward to achieving next? I think that'd be a good topic for us to close with, if each of you has a thought on that.
I don't know. It's always when as soon as you conduct a research study, it usually opens up so many more questions, and you can't address them all yourself,
yeah.
Which is a pity, but that's how it is. But I don't know. I don't have a specific measure. I think I have from alone so many ideas that kind of drive me that I don't need a measure where to get to. So it's more like really there are always so many nice ideas and so many gaps to be filled, that I don't have a measure, I think.
So getting to done for you is the beginning of the next
yeah,
multiple
so-
different directions that you
Yeah,
can go.
just seeing what should be done and doing it. So I think that's what drives me.
That's wonderful.
I guess there's a theoretical and there's a practical, right? There's that old joke, right? How do you never finish your mix, you just decide to stop.
Yeah.
And so from a practical perspective, I'll consider something done when I start to maybe realize that I'm not making it better, I'm just making it different. That it's good in a different way, and then, well, why wasn't this way being good sufficient? Because you can, like you said, you could just mix forever, you can compose forever. And so from a practical standpoint, yeah, it's when you've hit that, for me, it's when you hit that bar where the just noticeable difference is not worth the additional effort to put in. On a meta level, yeah, you're never done, right? You're never
Yeah.
done improving your craft. You're never done trying to figure out how to make people fall over without them wanting to. You're never done trying to figure out how to make it safe for people. So, yeah, I think that's what kind of keeps an organization like the AES going. That's two. Yeah.
I don't have that much money.
Okay.
Eric?
Yeah, well, done is a finite moment in time. And I mean, so the long or the short answer, one of the answers is there is no such thing as done. I mean, it was done a minute ago, but now I'm in a new minute and I want to do something else. I guess if I was to classify it some way that's slightly better than that, it's, did I raise the bar? Did I change? Am I offering the listener, the guest, an experience that they've never had before? Have I taken them to the next level? And if no, then shame on me. And if yes, that's great. Now what's next? Because you do it once and that's great and everybody applauds, and then you've done it and it's old and it's boring. So it's always looking for the next thing to keep improving it.
That's wonderful. I think that's a great way to close this talk, is looking forward to everyone thinking for the rest of AVAR about the next thing and what are the things that you want to solve next. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our keynote speakers and our panelists this afternoon, and hope everybody has a great rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.